Just after midday on March 19, 1945, First Lieutenant Grant Stout leveled his P-47 Thunderbolt in the hazy sky above Dortmund, Germany, and looked down at a train. He and his flight had spent the late morning working over German transport east of the Ruhr, trucks, half-tracks, anything moving on the roads below, and one target after another had gone down without a fight. Every train they had hit that day had proven easy, so when Stout spotted one more string of freight cars rolling along the tracks below, on the way home, there was no reason to expect this one would be any different. He rolled his Thunderbolt over, pointed the nose down, and dove. Behind him and to the side, his friend and wingman, First Lieutenant Alan Munt, started his own run a few seconds later, far enough back to see what Stout could not. The train wasn't defenseless. Hidden inside what looked like ordinary rolling stock were guns, camouflaged in freight cars indistinguishable. At 300 miles an hour from every other car the flight had shredded that morning, Stout flew straight into them. Within seconds, the other pilots watched his Thunderbolt come apart in the air, shedding pieces as it staggered upward. Then it rolled onto its back and went down. A parachute opened. Munt saw it a moment later, hanging where the fighter had been. The flight leader radioed that the chute had opened and the pilot had landed safely. Everyone assumed Grant Stout was now a prisoner of war, one more American flyer waiting out the last weeks of the war behind barbed wire. They were wrong about almost everything that mattered. What had actually happened to Stout in the minutes after he hit the ground would not be known, not to the Army Air Forces, not to his own family, for more than 50 years. To understand why an ordinary train was worth risking an aeroplane and a pilot's life to destroy, it helps to understand what the German rail network had become by the last year of the war. Germany fought World War II on a railroad. The Reichsbahn moved troops to the front, moved fuel and ammunition to the guns, moved tanks on flat cars faster than the tanks could ever drive themselves. After D-Day, as Allied bombers tore up bridges, canals and highways across France and Western Germany, the rail lines became the one part of the German war machine that still, mostly, worked. Rail bent instead of breaking. Cut a line today and German repair crews often had it running again. Within days, there was no single knockout blow against a network with tens of thousands of miles of track and sidings. The only way to hurt it was to keep hitting it, train by train, locomotive by locomotive, for months on end. That job fell largely to the fighter bomber groups of the US 9th Air Force, flying the P-47 Thunderbolt. The Thunderbolt had not been built for this kind of war. Its designers at Republic Aviation shaped it as a high-altitude interceptor, wrapped around a turbo-supercharged radial engine, meant to carry it above 30,000 feet, to meet German fighters far over the bomber formations. But somewhere over Normandy in the summer of 1944, the aeroplane its pilots called the Jug found its real job, down in the weeds, a few hundred feet off the ground, hunting anything that moved on the roads and rails of occupied Europe. It turned out to be suited to that job almost by accident. The huge radial engine up front, 18 cylinders arranged in a double ring, had no coolant lines to rupture and no radiator to puncture, the way a liquid-cooled Mustang or Spitfire did. Shoot away a single cylinder, and the other 17 would often keep the propeller turning. Pilots came home with fist-sized holes torn through a wing, engine cowlings packed with fragments, canopies shattered by ground fire, and landed anyway. One Thunderbolt from the 406th Fighter Group returned to base, carrying 138 separate holes from bullets and shrapnel, and it was flying combat again within days. Mounted in the wings were 850 caliber Browning machine guns, 4 to a side, each fed by 250 rounds, enough firepower to tear apart a locomotive's boiler if a pilot could get close enough and hold his aim long enough to hit it. That, if, was the whole problem. A locomotive boiler is in principle an easy target. It is large, it does not maneuver, and a puncture from heavy machine gun fire can put it out of action for good, sometimes finishing the job in a violent burst of scalding steam. But hitting it required something a fighter pilot's instincts fought against. Flying low, flying slow relative to the ground, holding the aircraft level and predictable for the 2 or 3 seconds it took to walk a stream of 50 caliber fire into the boiler and firebox. There was no dropping a bomb from 10,000 feet and calling the job done. A near miss on a rail line barely slowed the Reichsbahn's repair gangs. Killing a train meant coming down to it, down to treetop height, down to a speed where a pilot could see the rivets on the boiler plate, and staying there just long enough to finish the work. That was the trade every P-47 pilot made the moment he rolled in on a train. Accuracy purchased with exposure. The lower and slower he flew, the more damage he could do, and the longer he hung in front of every gun on the ground, still able to bear on him. For much of 1943 and early 1944, that trade paid off cheaply. German trains, for the most part, could not shoot back. Pilots on armed reconnaissance, missions flown on the way home from an escort job or a bombing run, hunting whatever target of opportunity presented itself, treated trains almost as practice, a few easy passes before heading for base. On the ground, German soldiers and railwaymen learnt to listen for the sound of an approaching P-47 the way a farmer listens for thunder, and the word they used for it, Jabbo, short for jagged bomber, fighter bomber, became shorthand across the Wehrmacht for the fact that daylight movement anywhere near the front had stopped being safe. Convoys spread out. Trains ran on tighter, more cautious schedules, favoring dusk, dawn, and cloud cover whenever the timetable allowed it. None of that made the trains disappear. It only meant that catching one out in the open, in good weather, still counted as a small victory before a shot was ever fired. The Wehrmacht could not let that continue, not with its rail network, absorbing this kind of daily punishment. Beginning as early as 1942 and accelerating through the following 2 years, German railway authorities started arming their own trains. Some cars carried a single machine gun. The trains judged most valuable: troop transports, fuel trains, anything the High Command wanted protected, carried 3 or more 20mm cannon, or the newer, harder-hitting 3.7cm Flak 43, capable of throwing a shell more than 4 miles, and the guns were hidden. They rode in specially built cars disguised to look like ordinary freight wagons or converted passenger coaches. Part of the roof cut away, the gun and crew concealed until the moment they opened fire. One gun often sat directly behind the locomotive, unmanned while the train moved. A spare kept ready in case the train had to reverse without uncoupling to re-marshal its defenses. On the most important trains, a matching gun rode in front of the engine as well. Fences kept the crews from firing into tunnels or signal posts. Lookouts watched for overhead telegraph wires the gunners were forbidden to hit. It was, in effect, a small mobile fortress built to look, from 400 feet and 400 miles an hour, exactly like every other train on the line. For a Thunderbolt pilot rolling in on what looked like a routine supply train, there was no way to know from the air whether he was diving on an easy kill or flying straight into a trap. Colonel Leo Moon, commanding officer of the 404th Fighter Group, found that out for himself on March 12, 1945, a week before Stout's final mission, and only a few miles away in the same stretch of Germany. Moon spotted 2 trains and rolled in to rocket and strafe them, expecting the kind of one-sided fight his pilots had grown used to. Partway through the run, he noticed smoke rising from the middle of the train, smoke in the wrong place for a locomotive fire, curling up from a freight car with nothing visibly burning inside it. He realized, too late to break off the attack, that he was looking at gun smoke, a hidden Flak car already firing at him. Committed to the dive, he banked through the fire, raked the cars with his own guns, and climbed hard for the cloud cover overhead. Shells had already found his left wing by then, punching through the fabric of the plane in a steady, rattling drumbeat that he could feel through the airframe. His brakes were shot away, and a hole had opened where his pitot tube used to be. Moon was fortunate. A more practiced gun crew, given more time to track him, might well have brought his Thunderbolt down instead of just marking it. Ground crews patched the damage, and the aircraft was flying again within days. What happened to Grant Stout 1 week later and a few miles down the same rail line was what happened when the ambush worked exactly as the Germans intended. Moon's close call and Stout's death were not isolated bad luck. They were the visible edge of a cost that ran through every 9th Air Force group flying this kind of work. The 366th Fighter Group, another P-47 outfit doing the same low-level hunting a short distance from Stout's own group, kept roughly 125 pilots on strength at any given time through the campaign in Europe, and lost 90 of them before the war ended. To flak, to accidents, to the sheer arithmetic of flying low and slow over defended ground, month after month. Something close to 3 out of every 4 pilots who ever wore that group's patch did not finish the war the way they started it. Numbers like that rarely made it into a press release about locomotives destroyed. They were simply the price of admission for the kind of flying that made those locomotive counts possible in the first place. By March of 1945, Stout was no stranger to what German ground fire could do to a Thunderbolt. He had grown up on a 180-acre farm in Pike, New York, the kind of place that grew potatoes and grain and kept a small dairy herd. And he had learned to fly before the war on money he earned working in a munitions plant, soloing for the first time low enough over his family's farmhouse that his mother looked up and recognized her own son at the controls. He trained through the standard Army Air Force's pipeline, primary trainers, basic trainers, the P-40 Warhawk, and finally, in Richmond, Virginia, the airplane that would define the rest of his short life. He wrote home that the Thunderbolt felt more like a rocket ship than an airplane, astonished by what 18 cylinders could do once a pilot opened the throttle. He shipped out to England and joined the 365th Fighter Group, pilots who called themselves the Hellhawks, flying low-level strafing and bombing missions in support of the advancing Allied armies from Normandy onward. Stout's Thunderbolt had already been hit once before, on August 8, 1944, during an attack on a column of German trucks near Prix-en-Pail in France. Flak found his cockpit, as well as his aircraft that day, tearing a serious gash into his foot. He flew the damaged fighter home anyway, brought it in without working brakes, and stepped out bleeding onto the runway. Within weeks he was back in the cockpit. He seems to have understood the odds better than most. In a letter written before he had ever left the United States, describing how badly he wanted to succeed as a pilot, the 22-year-old wrote that the law of averages is against me. An oddly clear-eyed line from a young man who hadn't yet seen combat. 7 months later, on the morning of March 19, 1945, a friend photographed him standing in front of his Thunderbolt before the mission, and Stout joked about the old superstition that a photograph before a flight invited bad luck. He said he needed to go prove the superstition wrong. He did not. That final mission had been, by the standards of the previous 9 months, a good one. Stout's flight, led by Major Arlo Henry, with Munt and First Lieutenant Donald Kark rounding out the formation, had spent the late morning working over German transport without losing a man or taking serious damage, train after train going down under their guns with nothing coming back up at them. It was the kind of morning that bred a dangerous kind of confidence. After enough easy kills, one more train looks exactly like the last one. Munt was close enough behind Stout's dive to see what came next, but too far back to stop it. Stout rolled in on the train, and this one had been waiting for him. What Moon had discovered a week earlier, smoke rising from a hidden car, guns already tracking, Stout discovered the same way, flying into a wall of fire he never saw coming until it was already around him. His Thunderbolt held together just long enough to pull up and, for a moment, looked like it might make it home. Then it rolled over and went down. Munt watched the parachute open, so close behind the impact that he came away, believing the canopy had snapped free from the shock of the crash, rather than a deliberate pull on the ripcord. Henry radioed that Stout's chute had been seen open, the pilot down safely. Kark, further back, spotted the white canopy on the ground a few minutes later, and assumed, like the rest of the flight, that Grant Stout was already being marched off toward a prisoner of war cage. For nearly 2 years, that was the story the Army Air Forces told his family. Missing, then killed in action. Remains eventually recovered from an isolated grave near Dortmund. In 1949, his body was moved a final time, back to his hometown of Pike. His mother, looking at what came home, was never fully convinced it was her son. Nobody in the family was told why any of this had happened the way it had. The truth, when it finally surfaced, came out of a war crimes case almost nobody remembered. In the 1990s, a Canadian researcher working on an unrelated project uncovered records from a US military tribunal held at Dachau in July 1947, one of hundreds of low-level war crimes trials conducted in the years right after the war, most of them long since forgotten. 4 Germans had been tried and convicted for what happened at Brakel, on the edge of Dortmund, on the afternoon of March 19, 1945. According to the tribunal's findings, the commander of the local anti-aircraft battery placed the captured American pilot in front of a crowd of townspeople and incited them to kill him. 4 men beat Stout with clubs, stones, and a shovel. The tribunal held that the battery commander then shot him. He was sentenced to life in prison and is believed to have died in American custody. Grant Stout had not been taken prisoner. He had been killed on the ground, minutes after surviving the very flak that shot him down. When Stout's sister finally learnt this, in 1997, 52 years after her brother's death, she called it the truth the family had waited a lifetime to hear. But even that was not quite the end of the story. Continued research, carried out in collaboration with a German historian, later raised uncomfortable questions about the tribunal's own findings, whether it was civilians rather than the battery's soldiers who actually killed Stout, whether the weapon was a shovel rather than a pistol, and, more troubling still, whether the American fighters over Brackle that day had, in the course of hunting trains and trucks, also struck civilians on the ground, including, by one disputed account, a funeral procession. Decades later, with most witnesses long dead, there is no way to fully resolve which version is correct. What both versions agree on is the essential fact: Stout survived the flak that destroyed his airplane, came down alive and unarmed, and never went home. Stout's death illustrates a danger that almost never showed up in a mission report or a kill tally. For a pilot shot down while attacking a German rail target, surviving the airplane's destruction did not guarantee surviving the war. Trains ran through towns, past station platforms and level crossings lined with civilians, and a strafing run that missed its intended target, or that killed people nearby, could leave a downed pilot facing not a prisoner of war cage, but a furious crowd. It was, by every honest account, a rare outcome. The overwhelming majority of American airmen captured after being shot down over Germany were treated, however grudgingly, according to the laws of war. But it happened often enough, in the war's chaotic last months, that it became one more risk weighed, consciously or not, every time a pilot rolled his Thunderbolt over and pointed it at a train. None of it slowed the campaign down. If anything, the rail war intensified as Germany's position collapsed. When the Ardennes offensive opened on December 16, 1944, low cloud grounded most Allied air power for the first week, giving German reinforcements a rare window to move by rail toward the front, largely unmolested. The moment the skies cleared, on December 23rd, the 9th Air Force's fighter bombers made up for lost time, flying from before dawn until after dark, hunting anything moving on road or rail toward the bulge. Trains that had rolled safely for a week suddenly weren't safe at all. By the time the German offensive collapsed in late January, the message to the Reichsbahn was unmistakable. There was no longer a window, cloudy or clear, when a train could count on running unseen. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, 9th Air Force P-47 units alone were credited with destroying roughly 9,000 locomotives across the European theatre, a toll that helped strangle the German army's ability to move troops, fuel, and ammunition to a collapsing front. That number was never free. It was bought train by train, boiler by boiler, by pilots who had to come down low and slow enough to hit a target the size of a delivery truck, over and over, never knowing which ordinary-looking freight car might roll back its roof and open fire the moment they committed to the dive. That was the calculation sitting behind every dry entry in a mission log, crediting one more rail target destroyed on armed reconnaissance. On paper, it looked like a hunting statistic. In the air, it was never that simple. Killing a train meant flying into range of a gun that might already be tracking you, disguised as the very cargo you had come to destroy, with no way to know which trains were bait until the smoke started rising from the wrong place. Grant Stout beat those odds once, in August, and flew home wounded. He beat them again in the air over Brackle, riding a shattered Thunderbolt down under a parachute that somehow still worked. It was the ground, not the flak, that finally caught up with him. 9,000 locomotives is a number for the history books. For the men who flew low enough to make it true, the price was never counted in trains.